on Paul's, quote, empty words, unquote, issues of method in editing the Pseudo-Pauline Epistle to the Laodiceans.
The letter Paul actually wrote to Laodicea. All right. 14th century manuscript of Laodiceans I found at the Morgan. It's actually the text of Laodiceans in the picture. Very, very cool. Oh, thank you. The vision of Paul himself actually writing the letter. All right. Oh, sorry. It's gonna work. Testing 1, 2, 3. You good? All right. So, yeah. I'm touched here. Good. J.B. Lightfoot and Rudolf Unger, in their most complete editions of Laodiceans, have cited fewer than 20 manuscripts of Laodiceans, and in the end, reproduce more or less what's found in Codex Fuldensis. Weber and Rice in the Stuttgart Vulgate just kind of give up and just print what they purport to be a diplomatic text of Fuldensis. It's not. You can go check. There's a bunch of things they've changed, but small things. I've found 200 plus, I think about 215 as of yesterday. Himmel uploaded a new one that had Laodiceans in it. 250 manuscripts of Laodiceans. And all of these manuscripts, there is only one sort of pre-Vulgate citation of Laodiceans I'm aware of. And it differs in some pretty significant ways from our early manuscripts. So I'm asking today, does this reveal anything to us about the history of this text? And so I've renamed my talk because reflections on method is the sort of thing only textual critics would read. Something like, is there an old Latin text of Laodiceans? Never fear, it's the same talk. It's still reflections on method. All right. Do not let the empty words of certain insinuating people defraud you, quoth the Apostle Paul in the 4th verse of his epistle to Laodiceans. Philip Tite, in the only book ever written just on this epistle, identifies this passage as the beginning of the letter's body. The subjunctive verb, reasons Tite, signals that Paul is no longer engaged in thanksgiving and is turned instead to address the situation of the church in Laodicea. This analysis of the verse motivates his critique of Richard Purvo and provides a key insight into the letter's rhetorical situation. At least one ancient reader shared Tite's special interest in the 4th verse of Laodiceans. The Pseudo-Augustinian Liber de Divini Scripturis, or the Book of Divine Scriptures, sometimes called the Pseudo-Augustinian Speculum, but there's an Augustinian Speculum, so I'm just going to call this the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber for now, because it's not the Speculum. Includes this verse in its collection of biblical quotations in the chapter called On Avoiding Heretics and Pseudo-Prophets, or Contentions About the Law, under the subheading Avoiding Profane Speeches and Novelties. Verse 4 is the only citation of Laodiceans, indeed the only citation from any purportedly non-canonical text found in the Liber. Clearly, Laodiceans belonged to this author's collection of, quote, divine scriptures, as it has for many centuries of Christians thereafter. See my forthcoming work on the reception of Laodiceans. The operative term in Tite's text is monoloquia, translated empty words. Tite here follows the text of the 6th century Codex Fuldensis, the earliest continuous manuscript of Laodiceans and his early allies. And Tite is in good company. All modern editors, Westcott, Harnack, Lightfoot, Unger, the Stuttgart, they've all printed monoloquia. But this is not in the text of the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber. According to this ancient collection of scripture, the Apostle Paul warned the church in Laodicea against the monoloquientia, or empty speech. I'm kind of forcing a distinction in translation there. We'll call it empty speech instead, of certain insinuating people. The difference in meaning between the two terms is frankly negligible, but there is a grammatical difference between the two terms, with syntactic implications that reveal that this substitution is not merely a matter of orthography or a slip of the pen. While monoloquia in Fuldensis is the plural of the second declension neuter, monoloquium The Pseudo-Augustinian one, loquentia, is the lexical form of a first declension found in singular noun. So it's singular rather than plural. So that's a lot mouthful, but accordingly, the plural verb, there it is. The plural verb destituant in Fuldensis has been changed in the Liber to the singular form destituat. Although the terms are more or less equivalent in meaning, the Liber here reflects a distinct text. Now, every modern editor has made the reasonable decision to follow the reading of the earliest manuscripts against the text of one citation. Citations, after all, are liable to adaptation, abridgment, and paraphrase, not to mention the vicissitudes of their own textual transmission. The preference for a manuscript with a continuous text of Laodiceans is, of course, well-founded. But the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber is not a typical patristic commentator prone to adapt quotations to new rhetorical contexts. Rather, the Liber is a collection of biblical excerpta and a consistent witness to the Old Latin text. If we follow the conventional dating of the Liber to the beginning of the 5th century, this witness predates Fuldensis, the oldest manuscript of Laodiceans, by more than a century. Scholars of the Latin New Testament know well that the oldest manuscripts do not always preserve the earliest form of the text. Often the Old Latin must be reconstructed from mixed witnesses that long post-date our earlier Vulgate manuscripts. And it is the agreement of varying readings in mixed manuscripts with citations in pre-Vulgate authors, like the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber, that make this identification of Old Latin readings and mixed witnesses possible. In addition to the appeal to the age of Fuldensis, J.B. Lightfoot argued on internal grounds for the priority of one loquia, the Fuldensis reading, to the one found in Liber. Lightfoot takes it as given that Laodiceans was assembled out of Pauline phrases, even referring to it as a Pauline canto. The agreement of Fuldensis with one loquium, found in 1 Timothy 1:6, says Lightfoot, counts as evidence that Fuldensis preserves the earlier text. And indeed, an even closer comparanda in meaning and form can be found in the Old Latin, Italian Old Latin form of 2 Timothy 2:16. So I think this is an even better argument for Lightfoot. But Lightfoot's argument inverts the ordinary canons of evidence. The existence of a parallel that might tempt readers or scribe to harmonize consciously or otherwise is usually taken as an argument against the priority of a variant. In the present situation, the Pauline monoloquia is the term that would have been familiar to Christian copyists and readers. It seems more likely, to me at least, that Fuldensis' monoloquia would arise as a correction of the non-Pauline and therefore less familiar monoloquentia than vice versa. Lightfoot's reasoning from the assumption that Laodiceans is a composite of Pauline phrases is dubious. Height has shown that this letter is not merely a canto of canonical lines. You can't put it together out of the Old Latin, but a rhetorically conventional letter of exhortation. Certainly, the epistle emulates Pauline style and opens with a near quotation of Galatians. I can read it too. But much of the letter's body has no canonical parallel. In fact, apart from the very word in question, monoloquia, verse 4 of Laodiceans cannot be derived from any other Pauline passage. There's lots of people trying to find parallels. There's no good parallels to this verse. To appeal to dependence on Pauline language in order to establish the only piece of potentially Pauline vocabulary in that verse is as viciously a circular argument as I can imagine. So it's hardly dispositive, but the agreement of Fuldensis with canonical vocabulary is evidence, to my mind, against the priority of this text. The term monoloquia is much more likely to be produced by Christian readers familiar with the pastoral epistles. The distinctiveness of monoloquentia in the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber, then, is an argument in its favor. Furthermore, the only correction to this phrase that I have yet found in the manuscript tradition, I noticed this after I said this to you. I got these backwards. So as you can see, monoloquentia is in the base text, and it's being corrected to monoloquia. So flip this arrow for me. The only correction goes from non-Fuldensis, Liber, to Fuldensis and pastoral epistles, right? So backwards. Okay, so internal arguments garbage. I'm not arguing today let's see here. We'll come to that in a second. I'm not arguing today that Laodiceans belonged to the earliest Latin translation of Paul. The Old Latin, possibly Marcionite prologues to Paul, do in fact assume that there is a Pauline epistle to Laodiceans, and Theodore Zahn thought it might be referring to this one. But the prologue to Colossians requires that this lost Laodiceans would have appeared in front of Colossians, and based on what we can infer about its content, probably resembled Ephesians. So you can see this is Youngkind's reconstruction based on the Broom's reconstruction of what that would have read like. Much more likely that the Laodiceans in these prologues was in fact Ephesians, not yet addressed to that church, readdressed to that church. The extent apocryphal Laodiceans, by way of contrast, comes after Philemon or Colossians in our earliest witnesses, and except for a few exceptions, lacks a prologue. Likewise, the early African fathers show no knowledge of Laodiceans, and the canon list in BLAD 6 includes 3rd Corinthians, but not Laodiceans. In sum, Laodiceans did not belong to this earliest stream of the Old Latin. Now, the Italian Codex Fuldensis contains the first hint of Laodiceans in an Old Latin collection of Pauline epistles. We can't go into the full evidence here and the relationship of these things, which people have alluded to this whole conference. But Claremontanus has the correct number of blank folia after Philemon in exactly the same place where the closely related Codex Fuldensis has a Greek and Latin title, of the Epistle to Laodiceans. This placement of Laodiceans after Philemon in the Old Latin manuscripts is corroborated by its citation after the pastoral epistles without anything from Philemon in the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber. So we have 3 witnesses that all are Old Latin, that all put Laodiceans in the same spot. If we can plausibly, I think, read these blank pages thusly in Claremontanus. I think that's the next slide. There we go. Right there. Blank pages, and then we could add the Liber, which puts it in the same spot, which is distinctive. This is not the spot it's found in the early manuscripts. This is a unique placement. So these 3 witnesses, as well as a comment in the anonymous Budapest commentary that I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it means. But these all suggest that a text of Laodiceans was once part of the Old Latin collection. The Pseudo-Augustinian Liber, nevertheless, is our only consistent Old Latin witness to provide insight into the text, into a pre-Vulgate text of this letter. Here's the placement in the Liber. So you can see it comes after the pastorals without a Philemon in place. So it's there in the Old Latin. All right. The Pseudo-Augustinian Liber is not, however, the only witness to this reading, monoloquentia, in verse 4 of Laodiceans. 4 of the oldest manuscripts, including Victor of Capua's Codex Fuldensis, the 8th century Frizingensis, a 7th century Merovingian Bible, which no one can persuade me anybody was meant to read, and the McBarham, the Patrick Bible. These 4 all contain monoloquia. So these all have the reading that I'm arguing is secondary, and the reading everyone's always printed. Notably, the Pauline epistles in all of these Bibles also appear in the distinctive order advocated by the Primum Quaeritur, the Pseudo-Rufinus' prologue to the Pauline epistles. He's got this order that does not correspond to the standard Vulgate order. And all 4 of these match that Primum Quaeritur, that preface order. So we have a distinctive sequence of things with a distinctive preface, I guess, a pretty standard preface, attached to these Bibles. In all but the Merovingian Bible, Laodiceans appears after Colossians, rather than after Philemon, where Laodiceans seems to have appeared in all the Old Latin witnesses. So in all 4 of these Bibles, we have the movement of Laodiceans from its spot in the Old Latin after Philemon to after Colossians. So there's movement, there's reordering. It's distinct from the Old Latin. This is hard to read. I'm borrowing this from because you have to rely on someone else's word for stone. Jerome's here, Old Latin's up there. There's our Fuldensis, our Merovingian Bible, and our, what's the other one? The Frisigensis, and there's our Irish Bible, D. We'll keep revisiting this page as I add more characters to our story. The earliest manuscripts of Laodiceans to read one loquentia in agreement with the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber. Okay, here's the new order. Yeah, there it is. The earliest manuscripts to read the reading that I think is right, in agreement with Liber, are Tours Bibles. The Bibles dating from the life of Eloquent himself do not contain Laodiceans. So there's 3 from Eloquent's own lifetime. They don't have it in it. But Eloquent's successor, starting with Eloquent's successor and the next 2 bishops, abbots, thank you, yeah, thanks. Fridigus, starting in 807 to 834, all the Bibles produced thereafter all contain Laodiceans. And these Carolingian Bibles incorporate a text of Laodiceans that reads one loquentia with the Pseudo-Augustinian Liber. These manuscripts also use the singular verb destituit, though in the indicative mood rather than the Liber's subjunctive. So these second generation Tours Bibles also agree with, I just read that. Oh no, I didn't. So they also agree, so here we can populate it. Here's our Tours Bibles, second generation Tours Bibles, down there. There's also another reading. There's a second variant that's found in the Liber, as opposed to those first 4 Bibles, Fuldensis and Martin and those. It's the difference between awertant and ewertant. Very subtle difference in meaning, but it's worth noting that the Tours Bibles and Liber agree on that reading as well against Fuldensis and its allies. So we have 3 variants, all of which Liber and the Tours Bibles are on team Ian, and Fuldensis Book of Martin is on team every editor before me. So a consistency. Oh, so there's our pattern of agreements so far. Interesting. The Merovingian Bible here crosses party lines. There is a yet more important line of evidence for the priority of the Liber's text of verse 4. In the mid-6th century, roughly the same time that Victor of Capua produced, so there's the order. So in the mid-6th century, roughly the same time that Victor of Capua produced Codex Fuldensis, a shadowy figure known to us only as Peregrinus, the Wanderer, prepared an edition of certain parts of the Spanish Vulgate. A distinctive form of the canons of Priscillian mark out Peregrinus's recension of the Pauline Epistles. Every witness to Peregrinus's text, including Capenensis, Complutensius, the first, Toletanos, and Legionensis, contain the Epistle of the Laodiceans. Though we lack any manuscripts from before the 9th century, Peregrinus seems to have included Laodiceans in his 6th century revision of the Pauline Epistles. Each of the Spanish Bibles associated with Peregrinus reads Destituit one loquentia. It has the reading of the Liber, it has the reading of the Tours Bibles, with against Fuldensis and its allies. This set of witnesses is especially important, not only because Peregrinus is a contemporary with Fuldensis, the otherwise oldest manuscript, but because the Peregrinian text is characterized by the influence of the Old Latin. Here's the different Bibles. So it's right there, top right corner. So it's characterized by its influence of the Old Latin. These Spanish Bibles then are plausible sources for Old Latin readings from Laodiceans. Lastly, final point, if you'll humor me, there may be one final line of evidence in support of identifying the Pseudo-Augustinian Loquentia as something like an Old Latin reading of Laodiceans. There is what appears to me to be, what appears to me a common error found in virtually all the witnesses of Laodiceans considered so far. Most manuscripts of Laodiceans omit verse 17 on this page. They completely cut it out. So it goes from verse 16 to verse 18. Only a minority of manuscripts, beginning with the Irish Book of Martin, has an additional line, greet all the brothers with a holy kiss, immediately before the greeting from the saints. As Unger long ago observed, from 200 years ago, the omission of this phrase is a clear case of parablepsis, the scribe's eye skipped from salutate to salutant. It is striking, however, that the oldest copies of Laodiceans preserved outside the New Testament. It is striking that the oldest copies of Laodiceans that are not found in Bibles, outside of New Testament collections, in miscellaneous manuscripts, preserve this full form of the text. The 10th century Italian Codex from Milan and 11th century Codex in Paris preserve just 3rd Corinthians and Laodiceans together. And the analogy of 3rd Corinthians suggests that Laodiceans was not originally composed as part of a biblical manuscript, but rather initially circulated independently. These miscellaneous manuscripts may therefore preserve a text of Laodiceans from before the letter started circulating with other Pauline epistles. It is notable, therefore, that both of these read one eloquentia, reading along with the Pseudo-Augustinian citation, my Spanish Bibles, against Fuldensis. So, no continuous text of Laodiceans survives in an Old Latin collection of Paul. I have argued, however, that the single citation of Laodiceans in the Liber preserves an older text at 3 points of variation than that found in Fuldensis and its early allies. The Italian text of Laodiceans in these manuscripts moved into the middle of the Pauline corpus after Colossians has been harmonized to the language of the pastoral epistles. Scholars of Laodiceans should look beyond these Vulgate Bibles for other passages where mixed Bibles have preserved Old Latin readings. This case study suggests that the 6th century edition of Peregrinus, the 2nd generation of Tour Bibles, and the independently circulating text of Laodiceans are a good place to start. There's everything I've quoted so far. Finally, about half of the libraries I visited have fully indexed and cataloged Bibles that have Laodiceans in them and nobody noticed. So if you're looking at a Latin Bible, check out their Colossians. It's something you know.
Thank you. We still have time for some questions.
Going back to your slide with the reverse arrow.
Yeah, with the arrows in the wrong way, yeah.
I don't know what, in 1247, I don't know what a correction looks like in that manuscript, but.
Sure. There's a bunch, there's one has a ton of them.
That, to me, that looks like an ultimate reading.
Yeah, fair enough. What's the difference?
Well, I don't know. Well,
Is it in the first hand?
Yeah,
Well,
that's right. I mean,
we,
yeah, okay. I mean, okay.
I don't know, just, it's not a
Yeah.
deletion of the other reading.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yep. So, I should have not said a correction, but I should have said that there is the one time we have both in a manuscript, someone's printed
Right.
one eloquentia and given it to direct reading Korea. Yeah, no, excellent point, thank you. Well spotted.
We could take one short question.
Can I ask something? So in the slide where you have all the pictures of the manuscript, including the Merovingian manuscript, are you sure that the version found in the Merovingian manuscript is not there on the
No, I have looked at this, I have looked at so many pages of this manuscript, so exactly right, you got this tilde, and it's really common to miss like nasals and stuff. So, yeah.
In agreement with the full Bible against the Italian part of the instead of I mean, it looks to me like they're not being able to do that.
I so want you to be right, because this is the one that doesn't have isn't reordered in the Freedom Inquisitor sequence. It's the only one of this group. But I mean, there's a cube here, which you can see in a better picture, and then there's just this, what we call in Minnesota, a swale.
I'm not an expert.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to chat. I've looked for another one of this form of marking in this manuscript, and I've not been able to find anything that looks like it. So.
Thank you very much. So as our grand finale, Christina Kreinecker from KU Leuven will be speaking on who is divided. 1 Corinthians 7:33 to 34, revisited through Latin